Hello. Hopefully we've overcome the 10-second delay here, and I'm here to introduce our next session. Thomas just hopped along in here. We had some technical difficulties, but hopefully they're all sorted now, and we've overcome them. Tom is going to be presenting the next session to you guys. Tom is an extremely talented guy working over at Searchmetrics. That's being around. Working on his master's. And specifically, he's talked to you about what can you do in the SERPs when Google keeps changing everything, when Google is altering our titles, when it's altering our meta descriptions, when they have so much control over the SERPs and they're choosing how to display these things, where do we still have the control? What does strategy look like when that happens? And he's going to dig into all of that here. So I'm going to shut myself up and let Tom jump into this and take over.
Thanks, Dominic, and sorry to the viewers for any technical difficulties that we're going to have to overcome. So please just bear with us, and we're going to do our absolute best to get through this presentation. We're going to do a bit of a call and response, so you're probably going to hear me say next slide quite a bit. So let's try that out. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Let's see if this works. Awesome. So just briefly about Searchmetrics, we're a full stack SEO solution-driven company. Please get in touch with me via LinkedIn. I'll be sharing my profile link in one of the forthcoming slides. We really do help large enterprise businesses realize their SEO goals. There is the LinkedIn link, and we also like people to message us on Twitter as well. So please feel free to reach out. Also, if you have any questions that extend or go beyond the scope of this session, please hit me up on LinkedIn. I always try to respond to those questions. On to the next slide, please. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We have a lot to get through, so I'm going to be going at quite a rapid pace. The reason is because the point that I'm trying to make with this presentation is quite big picture, quite macro, rather than micro and super techy. But in order to make this macro point, I have to go through the technical details and some of the weeds. And really, the thing I want everybody to take away or to think about is, firstly, we're going to look at what is Google changing in the SERPs dynamically, so beyond your control. Why is Google doing that? How does that affect websites? And more importantly, how does that affect revenue? And ultimately, at the end, what you can actually do to kind of counteract those effects. So let's get started. If we can move forward one slide, please, that would be great. And again, one more. So what is Google doing? So Google is actually going after tofu. So not a vegan food reference, but top of funnel content. Of course, you have tofu, mofu, bofu, top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. Top of funnel kind of content that your users first interact with. So they're in the kind of searching stage. They just maybe want an answer to a question. Google is showing flights. We're all familiar with this. What I'm showing is nothing new, but there are some interesting points to be made that I will discuss. So if we could move forward one. Great. Also finding the best flight. Now, this is way more interesting than the last example because over the years, Google has got way more advanced in terms of what it can show for the different stages of funnel in terms of content, because we're beginning to move through the funnel. Because not only can you check your flight status, which is relatively a harmless thing, if you're checking your flight status, you've already bought that flight usually. But if you're searching for a flight to buy, Google has very advanced functionality. It can show prices, airlines, and it's almost assumed the role of a Skyscanner price comparison site. And it does that by taking data from different sources and effectively selling that SERP result as one of its own, which we know it's not. If you click away and try and buy, then you'll land at one of the airline sites or an airline ticket broker site. If we could move forward one. Same for products, right? Top of funnel, middle of funnel. Maybe you know what product you want to buy, maybe you don't. However, Google returns so many product ads. And here the point I'd like to make is these are ads, right? They are not price compared results. That you've got the little box at the top that says ads. We'll stick with this example for a while. So imagine you're in the market for some Bluetooth headphones. You want to know which ones are the best, quite simply. So Google comes up with an answer And that answer in this case is, from left to right, these product ads that it shows. But the ads don't compare prices. So if we could move forward one, please. Great. Here is a featured snippet from the same result. So just below those product ads for the same search term. Okay. And hey, what a surprise. Google has taken organic content from this online comparison or online quality kind of blog, Tom's Guide. And not mine, by the way, if anyone's drawing that inference, it's not mine. And amazingly, the Sony WH-1000, whatever the letters are, matches exactly with the product ad. And that's really, really interesting because you're taking an organic result from a completely different source and you're getting ads that people bid on through Google Shopping or CSS partners, however you want to call them. And that's actually been matched by Google deliberately, which is way, way, way beyond perhaps the capability that a lot of people would expect. If we could move forward one. So here you can see the SERP matching up there. You can see the Sony WH and the product ad above from this result. And if we could move forward again. Great. So, why? Google's mission is user experience as long as it's able to derive revenue. So in this example, organic results are typically a sign of quality for users. If you see the featured snippet and see that the same headphones listed there, you think, well, this is organic search. This isn't dictated by bids and auctions. Therefore, it must be a sign of quality. And if it's made it into the product ads, you have an opportunity to buy or at least research that product. So Google's kind of artificially increasing its own click-through rates because, of course, it earns revenue on those shopping ads that it runs. So, but what is the problem with that, though? If we think about this for a second, why is it so, not necessarily bad, but why is it so changing the landscape if Google is beginning to take that function of top of funnel content? Well, imagine what used to be there, then that helped users research products, get better answers to questions and stuff like that. So while the example with the flight tracker was relatively harmless, when it comes to ads and what people buy, Google has an increasing influence on that by matching organic results or choosing what to show effectively. So, if the person running those ads is the one controlling the SERPs, then obviously there's a revenue incentive there. Whereas for organic traffic, yes, of course, you want to delight your users and have more visits. But the way that you do that, especially in organic, is by providing the best possible service, particularly in the area of comparing prices and going shopping online. So if we could move forward one more. So Google is taking more and more real estate. If you look on a mobile device, it's sometimes even hard to spot the organic result. Above the fold content is mainly snippets and ads. If we could go forward one more. Great. Can you find the organic link? Yeah, this is just a fun little, the full screen image of this, there's actually a product ads down the side. I believe when I first screenshotted it, there were even more ads below. You can see ad, and then right at the bottom, you've got the so-called organic. But if you look closely, you'll notice that that link is indented. So I believe I have a close-up of this. If we move forward one. Yeah, the indented link, right? So this is Google testing a new SERP feature, and we're beginning to move to the part of the presentation where I talk about Google dynamically changing things. Okay, and this is really, really key to understand because it can inform the heart of any SEO and even PPC strategy. Most of the things that I'm sharing today apply equally to the world of PPC and web performance in general. So now the indented results, there's been a lot written online. I like to keep things macro. So if you just imagine that where there used to be two organic domains, now there's one. Google is showing you, these two responses from the same domain apparently provide the best result, right? You've seen, I think, 4 or 5 ads and probably 10 to 15 product ads. And your only option to go to a domain organically above the fold in this result was whathifi.com, right? So of all of that space, one organic domain exists. I wanted to show you an extreme example of the real estate that Google's claiming away from the world of organic. So we've got identity links, we've got rewriting titles. I'm sure many people in this audience will have experienced this. There have been studies written online that estimate anywhere between 25 and about 50% of your titles. So what the blue link shows is rewritten by Google. Big question, why? The studies that I've read suggest that this is mainly happening to shorter titles or longer titles, effectively anything that falls out of that norm, which is around 55, 60 characters, I believe. So if you're extremely like a short title or a long, there's a very high chance that that will get rewritten by Google. And again, it goes back to the same thing. Google's always trying to increase the click-through rate. However, your titles may be perfectly optimized for different search terms, but Google can dynamically show a different title based on what people are searching for. If you think of like dynamic text ads, for example, that can increase the click-through rate. The problem is for SEOs, like myself and like many people in the audience, is how do you control this if at all possible? So let's move forward one. And this is just a little aside of, Google likes to have a little bit of almost the carrot and stick approach. And I'm not calling Google out in any way. I'm simply observing facts that are proven by data. A few years ago, the talk was mobile internet is slow, which is true, it was. So instead of fundamentally fix every website, here's a minimal sparse HTML framework called AMP that no one was familiar with. And many publishers particularly pursued this AMP approach. However, in recent news, Google is going to drop the AMP badge if it hasn't done already. And Google is, always trying to move the goalposts of what is a good standard of quality that it aims for, which really makes it hard because things are shifting. While AMP was a big topic, now it moves on to Core Web Vitals, which we'll talk very briefly about. If you wanted to land your media content in the top stories, AMP used to be a requirement for the carousel, a hard requirement. So publishers were kind of forced into that, but now it's not. So Google's never afraid to test a metric or something new and then roll back on it. Okay, and this is kind of bringing me to the main point. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So just a brief note on Core Web Vitals. Again, this is an aside. This is a brackets, a parenthesis of the presentation, just to give people the briefing, right? It's an update that focuses on page experience. Started rolling out mid-June, completed roughly August 2021 in terms of the rollout. For people in this audience, it's sufficient to know that, the two main Core Web Vitals are LCP, which is loading time, and CLS, which is image stability, if your page jumps about with ad banners. So let's move forward one. Let's have a look at data pulled from Germany. And this is just sort of backing up my point with data about Google testing metrics. So even there's so much hype and so much online discussion about Core Web Vitals. Do I need to optimize? Do I need to optimize? If everyone looking at this graph can see, there are 3 lines, and I'm sorry for the resolution if you can't quite, there's orange, blue, and green, which represent desktop and phone, and the green line is the target that Google would like you to hit, which is 2.5 seconds. And the graph is over roughly a 2-year period. That large bump in the middle, so the higher the score, the worse. Does that mean that in that 6-month period that every German website suddenly had poor performance? No. The real answer, which is quite shocking, is that Google was heavily testing the metric and changed the goalposts of how that was measured, right? And by the time we get to sort of June, when the serious rollout of Core Web Vitals is happening and its testing is being complete, we see all those values very quickly normalize. So many websites who had concerns in February or March suddenly didn't have concerns in terms of, so this is CLS, by the way, image stability, didn't have concerns when they got closer to the rollout period. And I can guarantee most of these websites didn't make huge optimization efforts, having spoken to them in the industry. So let's advance one slide. Same can be seen in the US. Let's go ahead once more. The same can be seen in France. And again, once more, let's go ahead. So did you notice a pattern? Of course. Web devs and companies don't optimize their sites all at the same time, but what happens is Google does test new metrics at the same time. So when something new comes in, although there's a huge clamor to try and get on top of these metrics, it's first important to understand what and how Google is measuring. And is Google actually testing these metrics? Is it serious about implementing them? Let's move forward one. So what is the impact? Move forward one again, please. The better question to ask is who did all of these changes affect the most? And this is a key takeaway from this presentation, is the truth is that the best optimized sites were affected the least by all of the changes of the last 5 or 6 years. Good user experience, good web performance, and SEO basics have stood most businesses in good stead. So if you have a culture of proactively following these tips, largely, if you average out all of the data, we see that the performance wasn't affected too much. However, if you're reacting and being reactive, oh, Core Web Vitals, we need to do something. Oh, AMP, we need to change. This reactive nature usually means that there isn't a performance culture embedded in your company or your company's web culture. And a classic example is loading time, and I'll show you exactly what I mean with this. So if we could advance one. So yeah, like I mentioned, the real key is to be proactive. And the best online brands, and this comes out from the data, so really those top 100, 200 brands are always trying to constantly improve. So if you're reacting to something, you're usually too late, unfortunately. So don't wait for Google to tell you. Put user experience at the heart of everything that you do. And by definition, good user experience has to include a site where the images are stable, where it loads quickly, where you have a logical checkout flow. All of these basics need to be done. But you don't need to be dictated by Google, because if you have done those things, you would already pass Core Web Vitals easily. That's the interesting point. So let's move forward one again, please. Okay, so this on chart in this dimensions is a little messy, but it has a lot of information, and I think it's really, really interesting to look at. All of this is measuring the loading time of websites over time in 8 or 9 different industries. And so specifically, and this is real world data, this isn't simulated, this has been pulled from the Crux data set, which is an excellent resource. So we can see, just looking at the lines from top to bottom, top being slow, we have travel and fashion at the top. In January 20, we measured that the average loading times in the case of travel, and this is US data, so it's a bit slower than Germany, but still was up above 4 seconds, which is really slow. With fashion around 3.5. Now, fast forward 20 months, and fashion has decreased from 3.5 to about 3.26 seconds, something like that. And travel has made similar gains. What's important to note is that all of these are the top 100 brands from each industry. So we've got B2B, dictionary sites, finance, we've got quite a good range there. And what's so interesting is that everybody made gains, but it was only the top brands that made as much gains, whereas the average website, if you compare it to the average, was less. So even if these companies didn't do it perfectly, they certainly had enough of a performance culture or enough of an eyeball on mobile loading time in particular, because they know that loading time impacts their conversion rate. So they have to at least improve as much as their competitors. And that's what I'd also like you to remember, is that you're competing in your niche. If you know that the average loading time in the fashion sector is a second higher than it is in the B2B SaaS sector, your goalposts are wildly different. That's why I'm trying to get the point across. You shouldn't let Google dictate those metrics. You need context and to make sense of that regarding your geography. So in Germany, loading times are a little bit quicker than the US and the UK, which is important to know. And your industry, right? Whether you're in a slower, more laggard industry in terms of web development, or in a high-tech, fast industry, something like B2B SaaS typically have very well optimized sites. And also what device, you need to know what's happening on desktop and mobile. Okay, like I say, all these slides will be shared. And also just for the viewers, if you want to Google Core Web Vitals industry dashboard, I actually update data like this every month for Searchmetrics. We have a really great page dedicated to this that goes in way more detail than I can today. So let's advance forward. So what about organic and direct revenue? So let's go to the next slide. the million-dollar question. So I've been saying that Google's reclaiming more real estate, so effectively there should be less revenue from organic, right? That is the hypothesis. If we move forward once again, surely then conversions and revenue from organic must be shrinking. Well, actually, the surprising answer is no, and we're going to prove that with two contrasting industries. Just conscious of time, we're going to go through this a little bit quickly, but again, like I say, all the slides will be forwarded. Computers and tech, and fashion and apparel. And so if we move to the next slide, I can demonstrate these industries are very different because of the purchase behavior that's involved with each of these. Computers and tech is a largely desktop orientated conversion industry. Fashion and apparel, we'll see, is heavily on the mobile device. Let's look at the conversion rate. So we can see direct is quite low, moved up to organic search a little bit higher, and up to paid is 3.2. So this is the conversion rate by channel. However, if we go to the next slide, now if we look at the revenue distribution, all of a sudden direct and organic make up the lion's share of the revenue, even though the conversion rates were lower. What this actually means, and this is based on real revenue data from peak.ai, which is another great resource for everybody out there. The thing is that it's almost impossible to correctly attribute where those users came from. Yes, you have cookies and tracking. However, isn't it possible that someone sees a social media ad and then goes and Googles that website on direct search and then goes to the website? Isn't it equally possible that they also Google terms? And if you're organically optimized, even if they saw an email campaign, a social media campaign, and a text ad, they may still go to Google, search, see if your brand ranks. And if it does, wow, you have that organic validation factor, right? And this is true. So the point is that your website, your performance, and your SEO is at the heart of all of these conversions, because eventually, in most cases, all of these users end up on some kind of landing page, or you're checked on Google in terms of how are you ranking, how does your brand appear. It's super critical for all of these channels. Okay, next slide, please. Lifestyle apparel, and a completely polar opposite industry. Very mobile driven, purchase behavior, very, very different. We can see conversion rates by different channels, direct, organic, and paid between 2 and 3, roughly, something like that. So a bit more of an even split there. And if we move to the next slide, revenue distribution by channel looks almost exactly the same as in tech and computers. Now, why that's so important is, regardless of the average conversion rates, regardless of the device split, what you need to look at is where is your revenue coming from? And again, this is being conservative because this attribution is not necessarily taking into account all of the different channels. You may attribute a social media ad to a conversion when actually maybe it's a combined channel effort, right? Where if someone searches and combines the different touch points, it's really hard to do multi-touch point attribution well. The point is, organic search and direct is still making up around 50% of people's revenue in an industry where you wouldn't expect it to. This industry, you expect social media ads and email to absolutely dominate, as well as paid search. However, without organic and direct, a conservative estimate would be that that makes up 50% of the revenue. All right, so thanks for bearing with me with the data points. Let's move forward again and see what we have up next. So hidden in these charts is the value of SEO. As I mentioned already, SEO is at the heart of everything you do, and so is user experience. Web performance influences conversion rates on every marketing channel that you have, because eventually someone will end up at a landing page. Equally, on organic search, if someone Googles a few terms on Google and they don't see you kind of ranking at all, then you're like, who is this brand? They don't even have a presence, particularly in high value objects, right? Like if you're researching maybe computers and you're not mentioned in any article, or technology that people want to buy, or smart devices, and you can't really find that product anywhere, it's actually a weird feeling you're less likely to buy. All right, so let's move on to the next part. Great, the ROI of organic traffic is still high. So clearly from the revenue perspective, we can see that it's still high, but what about the ROI of actually like an SEO campaign? With real estate and SEOs seemingly being able to influence less and Google dynamically changing everything, surely then the ROI would then drop. Well, actually, no. Let's look at a fairly conservative example taken from a major brand. And again, this disclaimer alert, these numbers are fictional. This is an estimation, it's an illustrative purpose. So let's move on to the next slide. So I was speaking in Paris yesterday at the Sister event, so apologies, but this example is taken from French, the French version of Zalando. We got a new ROI calculator embedded in our Searchmetrics suite, which is running really well. Basically, without going into too much detail, this is a very, very conservative estimate where we look at only influencing roughly 20% of your traffic and boosting this roughly by 1% a month. Roughly an average order value of about $75, something like this. Industry standard conversion rate, which we took from the previous slide. We set a margin quite low, around 30%, and it had very high SEO project costs, but we're still making a very, very healthy monthly ROI. And again, this is a very, very conservative example taken with real traffic data from the Searchmetrics suite. And again, the revenue numbers are completely fictional, so that's just a disclaimer. But I can guarantee you that the ROI of SEO done well is still very, very high, especially over a longer period of time. Okay, so let's move on. So brands are targeting Core Web Vitals performance. We're going to go through this section quite quickly. I've spoken enough about Core Web Vitals, but all I want you to get from this part of the presentation is there is a link between what you do in terms of user experience and revenue. And it's not enough to convince your company that this is true. It's really hard to convince people. I spend a lot of my time speaking at these conferences, and I realize that kind of people know it already, but you can't really just convince them by technical argumentation or even macro analysis. What you really need are examples of companies that have done this that are similar to you. Again, if you look in the slides, also there's you can Google web.dev case studies, and all of these case studies will come up as well. I believe these will be hyperlinked in the slides after as well. You can see Renault there. Swappy is an interesting one, which we'll look at very, very briefly. But the point of these slides is it's not enough to believe that there's a link between revenue. You have to go out and prove it, and with that data, get more buy-in for your company. So I'll explain what I mean exactly on the next slide, please. So the link between performance and revenue. So here we can see Swappy, an online retailer, increased their mobile revenue 42% by focusing on Core Web Vitals. So if we advance one slide. So I actually went in and took the real data of Swappy. So I measured their loading time over the implementation period that they actually mentioned to check if their claims were true. I could notice a very significant decrease in their loading time on both devices, particularly looking at mobile, right? They went from around 4 seconds to now around 2.5, which is a huge increase. And they, through this, believe it or not, were able to drastically increase the share of mobile revenue, because before they started this work, most conversions were happening on desktop, which is in their industry, which I believe was selling mobile phones, was completely counterintuitive. So let's go forward one slide. So how did they do it? Again, I'll leave this slide for there's a case study link in the slides, and I'm not going to go into the technical details here, but it is pretty much a mix of web dev 101 and a few more advanced things. But in general, when we're talking about optimizing things like loading time, it's all about doing the basics correctly. I've got the bullet points there of roughly how they did it and a case study link, but conscious of time, I'm going to move on to the next slide so we actually get through all of the important stuff. So what were the business results? 42% increase in mobile revenue, relative mobile conversion rate increase from 24 to, or I should say, share of mobile revenue increased from 24 to 34. There are many other examples of this, and it makes good sense. If you're a PPC performance marketer, you know that landing page performance not only has an impact on conversion rate, it also has an impact on where those ads are shown, your CPC, or whichever top of page, whichever metric you're using, because Google will perceive that page as a poorer performing page versus the others. That's why it's so important relative to your geo, to your industry, to the devices you're targeting. You have to make sure that you're performing average as the top 100 or 200 performers, if not better, if you can. Okay, let's move ahead. So where does that leave SEO strategy? A better question is, what are the SEOs and marketers actually doing, right? I've said that Google's reclaiming all of this, real estate, taking away space for organic results. But really what I want to get to the heart of is, it goes back to that slide about saying to be proactive rather than reactive. Here's some fun stats that come out every year from HubSpot, right? HubSpot's great for this. 69% of marketers invest in SEO, but only 17% of marketers use landing page A/B tests, for example. However, if you speak to someone at a conference, all of them go, "Oh yeah, we do A/B testing." But how many people actually do this? They go away from the conference, they implement it, they check the data, they go away and get all of the answers to the questions that I've been saying. If you're able to do this within your company, answer things like, what is my segment? What is my niche? Where do most of my users convert? What channel? What device? And what are the metrics that I'm competing against? How quickly do pages load on average in other parts of my industry segment? If you can begin to answer those things, you can also begin to understand the optimizations that you may need to do. You may be there already, or you may have a journey to go on like Swappy, where they built that performance culture and tied it to a business revenue metric. By measuring the effect it had on their conversion rate and their mobile sales, they were able to show it at least had some effect on this, because apart from that, they largely weren't changing anything in their strategy. So do we always do everything we say? No, absolutely not, which is why I want this to be more of a big picture thinking presentation, where the key takeaway is get the answers to the key questions and put yourself in the correct context of where you find yourself in the market. And from there, you can begin to make a sensible strategy in terms of what you need to do. So if we move on to the next slide. So my golden rules for an effective SEO strategy, I'll talk a little bit about each one, and then I believe, I'm not sure exactly how well we're doing on time. I think we've got probably have about 10, 15 minutes for questions left at the end, maybe a little bit more. So if you do have questions on specific slides, please make sure that you're jumping into the chat and actually sending those to our great moderators, who will be drilling me with questions in 5 or 10 minutes time. And I'll do my best to answer each and every one of those. Create a performance culture in web dev that's connected to revenue. I've been there myself. I absolutely know a lot of enterprise companies have 1 or 2 or 3 people running a WordPress site, and they feel overwhelmed with the sheer amount of work that they have to do. Where is the time for this person then to think about optimizing Core Web Vitals when no one else in the business understands it? However, you need to find a way to tie what you're doing, SEO, web optimization, to business metrics. So you need to come up with a business case that will help you get buy-in. One fun fact is that, roughly PPC spend is about 10 times that of SEO, even though in the long term, the ROI of SEO is higher, which is crazy. The reason is it's much harder to build that business case. Core Web Vitals is a web optimization effort rather than a strict SEO campaign. However, I believe you can transfer the same kind of methodology over to SEO optimization campaigns. Look at the revenue coming in from your different channels and really measure what effect you're having on that. Take that back to your business leaders and show them that you're having a measurable impact. The real key beyond SEO and beyond web dev is putting user experience at the heart of these optimization efforts. And I know a lot of people say this, but I really, really mean it. Because if you put yourself in your user's shoes, go through the website yourself, with fresh eyes. How quick are these pages loading? Is this content answering my questions? Am I finding the information quick enough? Is it easy to purchase a product? Is the checkout process, does it make sense? Am I getting what I need? And if not, you need to find the answers to those questions. That why are your users not getting what you need? If you can't get the information from your own website, look at your 10 or 15 closest competitors and see what they do. And this is the true power of SEO as well. If you look at your competitors and see, are they performing better in general in organic search or worse? Are their pages loading quicker or slower? Are they getting more traffic or less? Are they doing better in terms of revenue? Asking why and then making those optimizations yourself is what it's all about. Selling SEO is more than keywords. I know it's hard to make the business case for SEO, but I want to urge everyone that by tying it to tangible things, like we want to improve things for our users and therefore increase our revenue, It's much easier for, you know, a VP of demand general marketing to understand than we've boosted XYZ, or we, you know, our share of keywords is XYZ. And of course, if possible, measure the ROI of all your efforts and create a business case for more buy-in. You have to make a business case for all of the things that you're doing. Even if it seems overwhelming, like how can I possibly measure all of the different things that we're doing? Take it project by project. You know, if you really can only focus on a few things, focus on those things that will make the biggest impact. If you notice that your page is very, very slow and poorly optimized, I really would focus a good portion of my time on that and making it as good as my competitors, in parallel to doing all of the SEO efforts as well as keyword optimization. And you can, you know, as Swappy did, and again, if you read through the web dev case studies, you'll get a lot of good guides on how they measure things. You can track that and create ROI. And if you are able to report back with positive results, hey, what a surprise, you'll be able to get more buy-in. And finally, experiment more, and not just because the HubSpot statistic told us that, but A/B testing. But really what I mean with A/B testing is try lots of different things. You know, try different landing page designs, try different approaches, look at the best practices that you can find in your niche and try and use as many of those as you can that make it relevant for your brand, right? By doing more homework and more investigation around you, often you can kind of get the answers to you need. You know, you can obviously, you know, come to a company like Searchmetrics and we can do a lot of the hard work for you, absolutely, and we're happy to. However, what's great is, you know, if you ask an agency, what is the best approach for this? What is the best way to do this? Look at people who are performing well and learn from them, because they actually, learning by doing, right, they have the answers to most of those questions. All right, let's move on to the next slide. I believe we've just about made it through to the Q&A. So I'm gonna request that our moderator hops back in and we take a few questions. I'm not sure how I did on time there, Dominic, as I was flying a little bit blind, but hopefully I've left enough time for questions.